Alright YouTube, how you diddling? This is the Disposalist, and in this video I'm going to talk about my settings, but just those related to aiming and control, just to keep it to a good length. Don't want to bore you any more than normal. Let's get into it. I'm just going to show you them in the order that they are. The first one is sensitivity. This is probably the most important one. It basically relates to how far, when you move your mouse, how far your soldier's aim moves. That's basically what it comes down to. But it's going to encompass all the ideas of personally how you find it comfortable to move the mouse. So I can't tell you what the best setting is. There is no best setting. It's going to be quite personal, but hopefully I'll give you enough information that you can set yours best. Now, what I've done is kept my DPI, my mouse settings, my mouse sensitivity in Windows to be comfortable. I haven't changed them to anything unusual. Some people can't adjust their sensitivity, so this will probably work well for a guide. I don't like to, so this should work for everyone. Yay. So my sensitivity is set such that it's comfortable in a Windows desktop, and what I then have to do is adjust this sensitivity so that my soldier moves in a comfortable manner when my hand moves in a comfortable manner. I suppose that's what it comes down to. Now what I like is to not really move my arm too much. My forearm's on the desk, my hand doesn't move that much, it's mostly wrist movement, comfortable wrist movement, and the way I've got my sensitivity set up is so that if I move my mouse to the left 3 inches maybe or so, but what that is a comfortable wrist movement, so I bend my wrist to the left, I'm looking behind me. That's the rule for how I've got my sensitivity set up. I can't even remember if someone told me that or whether I've worked it out for myself, but basically if I move my wrist a comfortable amount, my soldier looks behind himself. When you're running along and playing, I find this a comfortable rotation to automatically need to do. If I want to move further than that, if I turn around and there's actually I need to go a bit further, I can, but now I'm pushing my wrist into a little bit of an uncomfortable position. Really, what I'm achieving is a comfortable and quick 180 with my soldier. And that's it. That's how I chose to set my sensitivity. I'm not changing my mouse DPI, and I can move my soldier in a quick 180 with a comfortable wrist movement of my mouse. That's it. Raw mouse input I have switched on. I think that's what you want. It kind of ignores any Windows settings. You might have acceleration or other settings in Windows. This means the game ignores those, which you think is probably best. It will just confuse things. Vibration is a console controller thing. Sorry console guys, I'm not talking about console here. Invert vertical look. This is a very personal thing. Over the years I always do this. I have to do this in every game. Invert the y-axis, they often call it. Invert vertical look. I find it more normal for me to when I want to look down I push the mouse forward, when I want to look up I pull the mouse back. That'll be the total opposite of comfortable for other people. Put it how you like it. Invert vertical flight, you'd think I'd have to do the same thing, but apparently flying it's normal to push the mouse forward, and push the nose down to pull the mouse back is to pull the nose of the plane up. I've made another basic flight techniques video that you can go and watch, which talks further about that. Stick sensitivity, I'm not going to be talking about joysticks either guys, I don't find it necessary, and again that's in my flight techniques video. I don't find it necessary to use a joystick anymore. Mouse and keyboard works really well, so I'm not talking about that. Soldier zoom sensitivity I have not adjusted, and I don't need to adjust for my setup, and I will tell you why when we get to that. Soldier sprint, I like to click, I don't like to hold the shift key. I find holding the shift key can get quite painful for your hand after a while if you're moving with AWSD and holding the shift key to sprint at the same time. You can get quite a stiff hand. I've trained myself to just click and run and then release the forward key to stop running. I find that much better. Double tap to sprint, I used to do that. That can be a little awkward though. If you're tapping the W key to adjust your position gently to move yourself behind a tree to hide, and then you suddenly burst into a sprint, that's not a good thing, so I turn that off these days. Soldier weapon zoom, I click to aim down the sights. I don't like to hold my mouse. Right button is what I've got it set to. I don't like to hold that right button because it makes it a little more tricky to then move the mouse to aim. I find I click and then I can freely move my mouse to continue aiming down the sights. Same with vehicle, but I'm quite happy to hold the shift key to hold my breath, to steady my scope when I'm sniping. That is fine. I don't really want that to click because you might run out of breath more easily that way. The advanced controls, stick, dead zone is, I'm not talking about joystick as I say. Zoom sensitivities I am leaving as they are. And I don't really want to have to fiddle with all those. And we'll get to why I don't need to in a sec. And the same with flight control. Don't need to, thankfully. Vehicle aim relative control, I believe, is a console measure. I just did a bit of research on this. I don't think it makes a difference in the PC. It's to do with if you press forward but you're aiming backwards in a tank, your tank will actually move backwards if you have this switched on. I don't think it does that in the PC. I'm pretty sure it doesn't. I would have noticed. So it doesn't really matter. Decouple aiming from turning, I find that more natural. This is a personal choice. I find it more natural to be off. I'm quite happy when I move my tank to the left, the chassis, the direction of my tank, that my aim moves with that. That feels normal and natural to me. You may not like that, that's fine. But I decouple aiming from turning when I'm a passenger because you cannot anticipate the driver which way he's going to go. So then it might be a little weird when your aim doesn't move with the vehicle, but because you can't anticipate the driver moving, it's best to do that really, otherwise your aim would constantly be getting thrown off by the driver turning the vehicle. This is the important setting I was talking about earlier. The reason I don't need to change my zoom sensitivities, don't want to change my zoom sensitivities, and the reason I don't need to is because I turn uniform soldier aiming on. And I'm going to explain at this point what that does, just so you have a better understanding. The tooltip, you can see, enable the use of a procedural aim rate instead of the original preset numbers. The procedural aim rate tries to approximate constant movement in 2G screen space regardless of the current field of view or zoom amount. This helps with muscle memory for aiming. That's the important bit. This helps with muscle memory for aiming. Basically, this means that you aim in the same manner. It feels the same. Whatever zoom factor you've chosen, whatever field of view you've chosen, this algorithm, this procedural aiming, helps keep it feeling the same. So you can develop your muscle memory. Your aiming will get better and better and better. Even if you change your zooming, it may throw you off a little, but even if you change your zoom factors on your weapons, your aiming should still feel the same. I'm just going to briefly show you why that is. So I'm looking at the gate on the right hand side of my screen, and we're talking about screen movement. We're talking about aiming is a function of moving your crosshairs across the screen. Keep that in mind, and that's related to how far you move your mouse. If you want to develop muscle memory, then you'll be moving your mouse in the same way no matter how you aim. So if I wanted to turn to my right, on the right hand side of the screen there is the tree. If I want to aim at that tree, I'm moving my mouse about an inch. I'm moving it about an inch. Another 2 inches and I'll be turning around. Like I say, 3 inches or so my mouse spins me around. To move one half a screen is about an inch. Now if I zoom in and aim, I've got my pistol set to a 2x zoom, that's the way I like it. Then now on the right hand side of the screen is that tower window. If I wanted to aim at that tower window, I move again about an inch. So when I'm firing from the hip to move to the edge of the screen, about an inch is the same mouse movement to the edge of the screen when I'm zoomed in 2 times. Now if I change to my primary and zoom in, this is a 4x zoom. That second vase is on the right of my screen. Again, it's about an inch with the mouse. So universal soldier, the uniform soldier aiming, is making it so that no matter my zoom factor, I'm moving the mouse the same amount to move my crosshairs on the screen the same amount. Hopefully that makes sense to you. I'm not going to go into any depth because we could be talking about this for a while. It's quite complicated in some ways, but that's basically what it comes down to. The uniform soldier aiming makes, no matter what your zoom, the mouse movement to move your aim on the screen is the same. Now I briefly mentioned also field of view there. I'm just going to show you something to talk about my field of view settings, because although it's not a control setting, it does relate to aiming. And the reason for that is because the higher your field of view, you get more peripheral vision, I've got a 90 degree, just over a 90 degree field of view there, and you can see that the right angled corner of this courtyard, I can see both walls, both entrances. I find that convenient. It's a nice field of view for me. It gives me a nice amount of peripheral vision, slightly more than the default. But of course, as you increase your field of view, you get more information on screen, you're packing more into the screen. So by necessity, the things under your crosshairs there, the things directly ahead of you, are getting smaller and smaller. It's the only way to fit everything in. And if I briefly show you the field of view getting bigger, I mean, you can see it even though it's fuzzy behind me there. You can see my peripheral vision. Sorry, if my field of view is small, my peripheral vision is less. I can't see those trees. But what's ahead of me, what I'm aiming at, is much bigger. If I increase my peripheral vision, I can see the trees, I can see the walls. But what's ahead of me is further away, it's smaller. That's the way it works with field of view. Now my field of view I had set to just over effectively a horizontal 90. That's the way I like it. It's a personal thing though. You may find that things are more difficult to spot, things are more difficult, I can't see when I'm hip firing, if things that seem further away. Now this is part of the reason why I have my zoom even when I'm aiming down the sights, where in the real world your peripheral vision doesn't actually change just because you look down the sights of your gun. I find it quite natural when I look down the sights of a rifle in the real world, it does feel like my vision is narrowing. I'm quite happy for the target to seem bigger in my view, and I'm quite happy in the game even to lose some peripheral vision for the advantage of my target being accentuated there, to have it be zooming in. So 2x zoom even for my pistols I have, and a 4x zoom for my LMG there. Now the only other setting to just briefly talk to you about while I'm talking about field of view and talking about zooming is this one here, ADS field of view. Now what this does is have turned on or turned off applying of the player selected field of view when aiming down the sights. Now I've increased my field of view. If I were to maintain that field of view while aiming down the sights, you'd think that I would still get my 2x zoom and that would be fine, but I find if I turn that on, if I maintain my increased field of view when aiming down the sights, then on my pistol a 2x zoom, it does next to nothing. I'm not really impressed by that. So what I've done to make it feel normal to me, and this is entirely a personal thing, is I have it so that not only do I zoom when I look down the sights of my pistols, of my rifles, I have turned off the maintaining of my increased field of view when I zoom, when I ADS, when I look down the sights. So what this is effectively doing is removing my increased field of view. I think it goes, I can't even remember what the default is, sorry guys, but I think it is really something quite low, the default field of view. So my default field of view returns to what the game suggests is a good field of view, and it applies the zoom factor down the sights, and so when I then zoom in I get much more what I would consider a 2x zoom. And just to very briefly, this is the last thing I'm going to show you. This is a 4x zoom. I mean, that really does feel like a 4x zoom. If I were to turn off, or rather to maintain my increased field of view when zooming in with the rifle, you can see, I don't know, that doesn't feel like it's 4x as big to me. Yeah. So, returning to my original setting, so that I'm using the original field of view, I'm not maintaining my increased field of view when I zoom, when I aim down the sights, boom! I think that's much more like 4x, and much more like 2x. So, those are my settings, guys. I hope this has been useful. I hope I've given you enough background information on my settings and on what the settings mean in general so that you can choose your own, hopefully. I would recommend heartily the uniform soldier aiming. It stops you having to mess around with all these individual zoom sensitivities. Otherwise, say when you zoom in as a sniper to 8x, you might well find that your mouse sensitivity sends your aim all over the place, and it's very difficult to find control your aiming unless you were to reduce that sensitivity individually for that zoom factor. To avoid having to set all of those zoom sensitivities for individual zoom factors, just set your uniform soldier aiming on. Simple as that. The coefficient is quite a complicated discussion. I'm not going to go into that now. It does relate to, all I would say is it does relate to your aspect ratio. To have it mathematically correct, you should relate it to your aspect ratio. I think the original is 1:3:3, which is effectively 4 divided by 3. A 4:3 aspect ratio is what that's appropriate for. It does still work to a good extent, even if your aspect ratio isn't 4:3, and most people's monitors aren't these days. My aspect ratio that means that should effectively be something like 180. I've moved it towards that because there is discussion on what's the most effective, and people say that actually that coefficient is fine for whatever your aspect ratio. So I've increased it somewhat, and I find it works well. Perhaps you want to increase it towards what the aspect ratio should be, but when you get to something that feels okay, leave it there. Otherwise you'll be messing up your muscle memory. After a while of using that, your muscle memory will be used to the amount that uniform soldier aiming affects your aiming in all those different zoom levels and field of views. So don't change that coefficient once you've got something that's comfortable. Stick with it. Unless it really weirds you out or someone tells you you've picked something completely wrong. Stick with it, and hopefully your aim will get better and better. The only other thing to suggest for me would be to increase your field of view to something that gives you a bit more peripheral vision than the default settings, but not so large as you get weird distortion. I've seen some people with massive field of views, and unless you've got 3 monitors giving you a really wide actual resolution, then an increased field of view will give you all sorts of horrible distortion. I think this feels pretty natural, but it's down to personal taste. Good luck with your settings, and please leave me a comment or a thumbs up would be great. Please restrain yourself and give me a thumbs down, but hey, you can if you like. It's a free world. I'd love comments on these videos, especially if you make your own. Let me know what you think. Cheers, YouTubers. See you next time.